Hi, it's Titi here from mysacredblood.com. Welcome and welcome back to the only channel on YouTube that focuses exclusively on truly holistic menstrual care. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and subscribe and share the video with at least one person who you feel will benefit from the content. Today, we are talking periods. These are my 5 personal period pet peeves that I will be leaving in 2020. Now, even though these are pet peeves, they annoy me to no end. I am still going to have a lot of fun debunking these and just dropping them all together. All right, because they're so ridiculous that sometimes you just have no choice but to laugh. But on the other hand, of course, some of these are so serious that they actually affect the way that a lot of women see their periods and experience their periods. These need to be debunked immediately. And so let's start with what, they're all serious, but I'm going to start with the least serious to the most serious. So number 5 is period guilt. The idea that women feel guilty about feeling pain, about feeling stressed, about experiencing PMS. And this stems from the new development, we'll call it, of period leave. Well, it's not new. It's new in North America or in the Western world, let's say that. But in many Asian countries, like Japan, I believe, and Korea, period leave is already offered to women. However, a lot of women decide that they don't want to take period leave because they might appear weak or, not able to compete as much with men. And it's also been said that women feel less empowered by having to admit that, once or twice a month, we do feel pain and do need to take a break. To that, I say, does parental leave or maternity leave make pregnant women seem weak and less empowered? Does the idea that now menstrual care products are being offered for free in a lot of public spaces, does the fact that we require the government to provide us with menstrual care products, does that make us less empowered? Does using pills or other pain relievers make us feel less empowered? Does sick leave make people feel less empowered? I think it is absolutely necessary that period leave, whether paid or not, be offered to women who menstruate so that we can take the time that we need to recuperate or to re-energize or to rest or whatever. If we're going to be not very productive or more stressed during our periods at work, you're going to feel less empowered anyway. So whether you appear less empowered or you feel less empowered and yet you want to hide it, it still doesn't benefit us. So yes, period leave should be offered to those who want it. And for those who don't want it, they don't need to use it. Just like sick leave. I personally believe that this particular pet peeve is directly tied to pet peeve number 4, which is the idea that menstruation is a curse. We've all obviously heard the myth of Adam and Eve, or Eve and the serpent in the garden. And the result of Eve's disobedience was that women would have painful periods or painful childbirth and experience menstruation. Obviously, it is a myth, but because a lot of women are religious and do believe this or have been indoctrinated to believe it, so whether they're no longer religious or, even though they might not believe in the creationism or the story of creation literally, the idea or the link to menstruation being a curse still affects a lot of women today. The word curse in French is malédiction, and this means a wrongly enacted law. And the laws around menstruation, and there are many of them throughout many different cultures throughout history, are greatly unjust and wrongly enacted laws. But menstruation is also quite literally a blessing. According to etymology.com, the word blessing or bless means to consecrate by a religious rite, to make holy or to give thanks. And this comes from the Proto-Germanic blödsen or hallow with blood or to mark with blood. We know that a lot of blood rituals or religious rites that involve blood and blood sacrifice stem from the original blood sacrifice, which is menstruation. So this idea that menstruation is a curse, I'm going to be leaving that in 2020. And moving forward, I'm going to remind myself that menstruation is quite literally a blessing. Pet peeve number 3 is one that kind of breaks my heart, because this one is one that I heard from the late great Dr. Delbert Blair, whose theories I actually do, for the most part, agree with. But this theory kind of, I believe, is rooted in misogyny and womb envy. And a lot of men have an issue with menstruation largely because they don't experience it. So what Dr. Delbert Blair claimed is that menstruation is pretty much a patriarchal construct.
It starts with men. Menstruation.
That women don't require menstruation. And he goes on to list different women across history, some of them mythological, who didn't menstruate.
Not all women on this planet menstruate. Also, not all women on this planet have ever menstruated. Most Hindu women do not, and definitely did not, menstruate. Most ancient African or Kemetic women did not menstruate. Not Belkis, not Hypatia, not any of the so-called queens of Africa seemingly did, once they began to have knowledge of self. The Oracle of the Delphi, according to the Greeks, were a group of women who pontificated and led Greece through its heydays, and many of the oracles were females. They are said that the oracles did not menstruate.
His theory is largely based on, of course, observation. And that's all men can really do when it comes to menstruation, or biological males can do when it comes to menstruation, because men, of course, cannot experience menstruation physically. And so the only information they have about it is by observing women or people who were born with a female anatomy. He does say that although menstruation is normal, that it is unnatural. The part of his theory that I do agree with is the part where he says that women were once able to procreate through the act of parthenogenesis, and that women once did not require the use of male sperm in order to procreate. Now, the fact that we menstruate is obviously a result of the fact that we produced male. If the female never produced her male counterpart, then she would of course have no need to menstruate, because women once held sperm and were able to, yes, procreate without the use of a male sperm. But once the female created her male counterpart, she then required sperm from the male. So if women were still able to procreate through parthenogenesis, then we would no longer need the male sperm, and then our eggs, which would obviously be able to be fertilized on their own, would not disintegrate every month because they didn't meet the male sperm. If we want to claim that menstruation is not natural and it's not really necessary, then we also have to claim that men are unnatural and are unnecessary. But the fact that we do have men and we do now require male sperm in order to create human life, we obviously had to make, of course, a blood sacrifice to be able to do that. Not only is this idea sexist and misogynistic, it is also based on this idea that a lot of intellectual humans often like to separate the human species from the rest of nature. All other living organisms use nature or other aspects of nature in order to replenish. Just like some trees will lose their leaves in the winter and that plants require sunshine and soil to grow, the human also requires food in order to replenish some of the nutrients that we lose either through urination, defecation, and obviously menstruation. We need to take from nature. When we lose iron, we eat something with iron. And that's why we need to look at not just our menstrual period, holistically, but we need to look at our lives holistically and understand that we are one with nature. And so that if we lose something from our bodies, then we obviously can take that from another aspect of nature in order to replenish what we've lost. I personally find it interesting that a lot of people who do believe that menstruation is unnatural are the same types of people who are vegans, who believe that plants are living foods and we should be eating living things and we shouldn't be eating dead things. And they forget that when you pluck a plant from the ground, you are killing that thing. And all vegetables and fruits begin to die when we pluck them from their source. And so once again, this is obviously a result of intellectuals being a little too smart for their own good. Now, this idea of male observation leading to misconceptions about menstruation leads me to period pet peeve number 2, which is this idea that the menstrual cycle begins with death. And this one is one that I'm going to need the medical community and the scientific community to back me up on, because this one makes absolutely no sense that menstruation is the only life cycle, I repeat, that exists that begins with death. Every single life cycle follows the same rule, which is creation, maturation, degeneration, and eventually disintegration or death. But for whatever reason, and obviously the reason is that this is based on the male observation of the menstrual period, because of course he doesn't experience one, and that is that the menstrual cycle begins with the death of the ovum and the bleeding. The bleeding happens at the end, and so the menstrual cycle would technically begin just after the bleeding ends. That is technically the beginning of the menstrual cycle, when a new ovum is released and then when it begins to mature and so on. That's where we start the cycle, and then we end it with the death of the ovum and it begins to bleed. This is one myth that definitely is rooted in womb envy and in misogyny, and it needs to be left in 2020. Moving forward, we need to admit to ourselves and follow logic and agree that the menstrual cycle, like all other life cycles, begins with the generation of a new ovum and it ends with the death of that ovum. It doesn't begin with death. Life cycles just don't begin with death. Now, the same womb envy that leads us to believe that menstruation is not a life cycle but a death cycle is the same womb envy that leads to period pet peeve number 1 that absolutely needs to be left in 2020. I will be definitely leaving this one in 2020, and that is the term menstruator. This is just as bad as referring to pregnant women or women who are able to get pregnant as breeders. It is not okay ever to refer to a human being by their bodily functions. It would not be okay to refer to men as standing urinators, or to refer to babies as criers or eaters or shitters or pukers. It would not be okay to refer to seniors who happen to use a catheter as bag pissers. It is not okay to refer to people according to our bodily functions. Now, obviously, we know now in 2020 that not all women menstruate, and not all people who happen to menstruate identify as women. But the one thing that all these people have in common is that we all share a similar female anatomy. We all have a womb, we all have ovaries, we all release an ovum that disintegrates and eventually causes us to menstruate. If we are going to eventually move to that place where we're able to respect each other's pronouns, let's first try by respecting each other's nouns, okay? I am a female. I'm a woman. I menstruate, but I am not a menstruator. Just like I breathe, but I am not a breather. I eat, but I'm not an eater, okay? This is so ridiculous. Now, I get it that we are trying to move to a place where we're a little bit more sensitive and a little bit more politically correct, but this is crossing a line. This is liberalism gone to the extreme, okay? To the point where it actually becomes offensive again. We generally understand that women, for the most part, are the ones who menstruate. And we can also acknowledge that, of course, male to female transgender people also menstruate, and people who identify as gender nonconforming or gender fluid also menstruate. But generally speaking, it's women who menstruate. And so there's no need to completely dismiss the idea that women menstruate. We don't have to change the way we speak. If I refer to women when I talk about menstruation and to the female body and to the womb, it is not meant to be offensive, and we cannot take offense to that and make women feel guilty about being women. That is sexist. So technically, the idea that we're trying to be politically correct and more inclusive is actually alienating women, and that is in itself very sexist and misogynistic, and it needs to be left in 2020. Thanks again for watching. Have a wonderful solstice, or technically solstice eve if you're watching this on the moon day.
And remember, you can catch me here every moon day at noon, and that is Eastern time. I will see you in the next one.